So this was supposed to be all about victim consciousness. I had my notes prepared. I was ready to go. And then a familiar feeling rode in like a storm cloud coming from the horizon, triggered by rereading Solar Bones from Mike McCormick and remembering the death of my dad almost 2 years ago. I got hit by the deepest and darkest of feelings, the feeling that we as Irish people often run away from, the one that kind of clings to us and lingers around us like the mist and fog on our green grassy hills. Welcome to Healing From Irishness, and this episode is all about sadness. Hello and welcome back. No real housekeeping I think that I need to do today. There's been no funny comments that I need to address. You've all been very good. And nothing really to announce, so I'll just get on with it. This episode I want to talk about sadness, and I also just want to preface by saying I don't know how to talk about sadness, or at least I don't know how to play with sadness in a safe way. With all the other subjects that I cover so far and will cover so far in this podcast, I have a kind of a familiarity with them. You know, I can keep them at a safe distance. I feel they're processed. When we talk about guilt, when we talk about shame, when I talk about sexual desire, when I talk about like low worth and these things, I feel like I have disassembled them like engine parts. I've stood over them and understood what they all do and feel confident enough that I can put them back together again and the engine will work. But when it comes with sadness, I've never fully dismantled sadness. I don't completely understand sadness, but I do feel that for Irish people, to incarnate into an Irish life implies a certain willingness to understand sadness. It's so close to us, this sadness, and this very gesture that we make by taking on an Irish life, or a life that has been colored by Irish history and Irish genetics. If you're a grandchild or a great-grandchild, or you have it around you in the mist, in the air, then the implication is that there must be a part of you that is curious about sadness, that has a desire to experience sadness and that depth, because sadness and Irishness go hand in hand. And what's difficult for me is that I haven't always had personal experience of sadness. My dad died a little over 2 years ago. He had been sick for, I don't know, for 25 years. My dad had most cancers that you can list, one after the other. But it was really just at the end that he really fully showed the effect of all the cancer that he had experienced in his life. My dad had this phenomenal capacity, a very Northern Irish capacity, to a very Ulster capacity, to employ gallows humor. Do you know, my dad could be crippled with pain and still find ways to be the crack. This phenomenal resilience, and the resilience finally crumbled at the end, and he was just sad, and he was in pain, and he didn't want to show his face to the rest of us. And my dad died a little over 2 years ago, and the parting gift from my father's death, you know, my dad's gift to me, was a week of spontaneous tears. I felt a little bit like someone with incontinence, but it was connected to my eyes. Anything could set me off. And I got to the point where I could announce it. I could sort of telegraph it to people. I would be in the company of someone. I would say, shit, I'm about to cry. And they would say, what can I do? And I would say, nothing, like it doesn't matter. And the tears would flow. And they almost felt like they were separated from emotion. It was just like tears. It was just like a bodily function. They say that crying is a way that we detoxify our body. And I feel in the months leading up to my father's final passing, months where we were sort of every day in A&E, we were every day in hospital. And those environments were like torture for me. And never mind how they were for him. And I feel that all the tears were just detoxing all of this. And sometimes I'd cry and laugh at how absurd it was. Such a bizarre sense. And this is the part when I come to talk about sadness, and in particular the Irish relationship to sadness. This is where I feel a little uncomfortable. And I feel uncomfortable because I don't fully understand it. But I'm going to talk about it anyway. If you've listened to my podcast and you've known my work for a long time, you'll know that I feel no shame in talking about things that I don't fully understand. But with sadness, there's an extra element of insecurity to it for me. I feel like I'm walking a tightrope when I talk of sadness. An interesting thing happened, I remember, a few days after my dad died. We were out in Kilcullen. I think we were in the hideout, actually. I can't remember. I think we were in the hideout and we were having a bite to eat. And when my father died, we were playing the music. You know, we got the nod from the doctors and nurses that, yeah, he'll probably go this morning. You know, the vital signs are so weak that he might not last the day. So we spent this time with him around his bed. We had these little electronic candles, because you're not allowed to have a real candle. These little battery-powered candles, because if you brought a real flame into the A&E ward, you could cause serious damage with all the oxygen machines and so on and so forth. We had this little candle, and we were playing music, and we were playing this one song that my dad loved. It was a song that really connected him to my mum, and it's the Leonard Cohen song, "Dance Me to the End of Dance Me to the End of Time." Da 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 da. A very beautiful song, and we played that kind of on a loop for him as he was going. And so here we are. We're sat in the hideout ordering a carvery, and within the space of half an hour, that song comes on the playlist 3 times, and every time it came on, of course, I would cry, and it got to the stage where I think my sister got up and asked the waitress, and she said, "You know that song has come on 3 times. Can you change the playlist?" And I think she then put on like Kildare FM or something like that instead. But this is sort of, I always felt it through all of this process and through the absurdity of the sadness that I was experiencing, that there was a funny, tragic comedy playing out in the background. I have no doubt in my mind that it was my dad taking the mick by putting that song on 3 times in a row while I was trying to eat my fucking carvery. And this is why sadness is difficult for me, because it's very close and I still experience it, and it comes and goes. And so what I'm going to talk about in terms of sadness and how it affects the Irish is very, very much a personal thing. And so this may not apply to you, but I believe it does. I think we're connected with these things. And I believe that to be Irish is to sign up for an education in sadness. This doesn't mean that we have to be sad, but we have to be willing to approach sadness and understand it and transform it. So I think my first real kind of encounters outside of all my family and the community that I'd grown up in, my first encounter with Irish sadness was working in bars. So I started working in bars when I was about 15, and I worked in bars up until my 30s. And I traveled a lot all over the world. I've worked in bars a lot in Dublin, over in the Aran Islands and Galway, but then also like worked in Berlin in bars and worked in Australia in bars and worked over in New York in bars for a while too. And there's something about bars, from my experience of being a barman, is how they were these kind of temples of cathartic release for Irish people. As a barman, I remember experiencing so many nights working in bars where you'd have cleared out the room, you'd have the mop and the sweeping brush in hand, emptying ashtrays. This is showing how old I was. And there'd always be someone lingering, someone kind of there nursing the bit of a pint. And what they wanted instead was just to talk to you. They wanted to be listened by someone. They wanted to have a good cry. And I feel the bartenders in Ireland and the bartenders who work for the Irish, I do kind of hold a lot of space for the Irish sadness. I remember having like all these moments of someone just saying, oh, me going up to them and saying, here, you have to leave. And they were like, oh, don't worry, I don't want a pint or anything. Don't worry. Can I just stay here for a minute? And people offering to like, oh, here, look, I'll collect glasses with you. I'll sweep, I'll mop or whatever. And some lonely soul who just wanted to be with me for a few minutes and talk and tell me things. And then those same lonely souls would kind of come in on their own to the bar, and they would try and snatch bits of conversation with me, and not just me, but with other bartenders too. They try and like do a little bit of healing, express a little bit of sadness, feel a little bit of connection. And in the bars that I worked in New York and the bars that I worked in Berlin and places like this, I never had these encounters. I was never asked to hold space for people's sadness in these places. It was only in Ireland. This sort of deep and unexpressed emotion that wanted to come out and wanted to come out in bars. And I'd often have these situations where there was someone just in tears at 2 o'clock in the morning, and everywhere around us smelled of bleach, and the dishwashers were on, and the lights were down, and the curtains were pulled, and all the chairs were stacked up on the tables, and they were crying, and I was patting them on the shoulder. And then eventually they pulled themselves together and go, okay, thanks, I can go home now. And I feel that a lot of this sadness emerged in bars, and I feel a lot of this sadness emerged and was expressed towards bartenders and me as a bartender was because of my anonymity. I think it's the same reason we go to a therapist. A therapist feels anonymous and they feel safe. And a bartender can feel anonymous and a bartender can feel safe. And the safety that we're looking for is the feeling of vulnerability. Can we be vulnerable? Can we be vulnerable? Can we really express who we are to an anonymous person? And the implication of that is that we don't feel safe to express this vulnerability to those who are close. We don't feel safe to express our deep sadness. We don't feel safe to express the deep, uncharted realms of our emotions to those who are closest to us. And what does this say about us as a people? Are we not easy on each other? Do we maybe pick on each other's weaknesses? Is there a deep pattern in Irish society of bullying vulnerability? When we express our vulnerabilities, when we express the gentle parts of us, the soft parts of us, are we mean? And that's what I began to kind of see a lot when I sort of worked in bars, was that there is just this thick layer of sadness that exists in so many Irish people, but there aren't enough safe places for it to be released. And maybe this is why we leave. Maybe one of the reasons amongst the numerous economic, cultural, and social factors that send Irish people away from Ireland, maybe one of the reasons that we do leave is because we're looking for safety. Because we are carrying all this sadness in our genes, we're carrying all this sadness in our body, and it doesn't feel safe to express that sadness in Ireland. maybe the reason we go away is just to find safety. I'm 45 now, and I've lived, I mean, close to 20 years not in Ireland. I've gone back on occasion. But I always seem to find it hardest for me to find safety in Ireland. I found it difficult to really express the depth of my feeling and the sadness that was in me when I was in Ireland. But by going away, being dropped into different places, I found a kind of levels of kindness that just weren't available to me in Ireland. And I think that's the experience that I see reflected to me in a lot of the people that I work with day in, day out. I work with a lot of Irish immigrants. I work with a lot of Irish people or descendants of Irish who've moved away. And the part of the drive for them moving away was to find sweetness, to find more care, more gentleness, a place where they could escape some of the meanness they had experienced as kids, some of the meanness they'd experienced at schools. I think Ireland hasn't always been a place where it's felt safe to be fully sensitive, where it's felt safe to fully feel. I go back to my dad's funeral and all the time around it, and the amount of conversations that I had by his open casket with people coming up to me. I manned his coffin during the wake. I stood beside it, and as people came up, I shook their hands, I hugged them, and they told me stories. But people would come up to me and start to speak to me. They'd start to speak to me about my dad, and they'd say things like, "Oh, Jesus, he did this, and he did this, and he was such a character, and Jesus, he was some chancer, that man, and he did this, and he did this," because my dad was a rogue. He was a lovable rogue. And people would come up and they would be in mid-anecdote, mid-tale of how my dad had somehow done something and the guards heard about it, but he got away with it, or he did something cheeky and got away with it, which was the real spirit of my father. You know, he was a rogue, you know, chancer. And people would be mid-anecdote and they'd stop the anecdote. They'd pause it and they'd say, "I have to stop now. I'm about to get emotional," and walk away, you know, clutching, biting on her finger, holding themselves together. And it's all this fear of what might happen if I get emotional, what might happen if I fully allow this sadness to emerge. Will I cry for a week? Will I wail? Will I fall on the floor and start to beat the ground with my fists? If I let a smidgen of this sadness out, will it then allow a whole canyon of sadness to emerge? The canyons of sadness. And I remember Dublin in the late 90s, early noughties, and that really was a golden time to be in Dublin. It was a time when you could be a bartender and live within 5 minutes walk of the city centre. You could earn enough and live comfortably enough that you could go to a restaurant even on a bartender's wage, and you could still be out and about and live a life, and you could get clothes every so often, and there was a certain amount of freedom and financial freedom in Dublin at the time. And there was also a fuck ton of drugs. And within that kind of young rave culture, there were so many moments where people were beginning to open up to this emotions. We were beginning to kind of tap into the canyons of sadness as we expanded as people. The drugs that we were taking, ecstasy in its earlier forms, it brought feelings of bliss, and it brought feelings of euphoria, and it brought this huge joy. And as we reached those peaks of joy and euphoria, we crashed down in the days afterwards into like the darkest sadness and grief as we fucked around with the little dopamine receptors in our heads. But what we were doing what these drugs were doing and what this new cultural phenomenon was doing was it was really expanding Irish people, Irish young people who'd grown up inside shells, emotional shells that didn't go too big and they didn't go too small. We didn't talk about happiness and we didn't really talk about sadness either. We existed in this very mediocre state of sure, middling. We're middling. We're just getting by. And I feel that so much of that rave culture then, it broke that shell apart. And you'd find yourself in situations with people on the way to some house party at 3 a.m, or maybe an early house the next day, lost in the city, wandering around looking for cigarettes, looking for a party, trying to get phone signal, whatever it was. And you'd find yourself stumbling into a deep conversation. The conversation would bring you into the canyon of sadness and vulnerability. Drugs really were a gateway to so much vulnerability for me and for the people around me. We suddenly found ourselves emboldened to talk about these things. We could connect to these things. And then on the other side of that, we found ourselves experiencing these come downs and sadness and depression as our whole body just turned in on itself and kind of became dust. And when I think about all the sadness in Ireland and all the sadness that has grown from Ireland, I often think about the sea and how the sea holds such a kind of an emotional register. I had a few friends, one a very close friend in particular, who committed suicide by drowning. And I know this is a sort of a thing throughout the country where our water, our rivers and our seas seem to swallow the saddest people. And this is again just all part of this rich, very rich but very heavy task that we are enlisted to perform as Irish people. We have a history of trauma, but we also have a geography that supports sadness. We have a deep relationship with this sadness and what's being asked of us, as we move through our life and as we experience sadness. What's been asked of us is to really connect to vulnerability. There is our sadness quite often. Society teaches us to keep our sadness secret, to keep your sadness away. Again, coming back to this idea of the funeral, and I noticed like some of the closest family members of me, they just got busy. They got busy. They ran away from the sadness. They transformed their sadness into sandwich making, phone calls, organizing things. I, unfortunately, blessedly couldn't do that because I was a fountain of tears for a week. But we have to be careful as Irish people. I think we have to be at one level, we have to be cognizant that we are carrying so much. We are carrying the memory of so much grief and sadness inside our body. And this sadness wants to express. And this sadness needs to find safe places to express. It can't just be after closing time in pubs. I feel the way forward for Irish people is to be able to gather and wail. I imagine scenarios where we are out in fields at early dawn and we're weeping together and holding each other when there's lots of cups of tea and biscuits. And so whatever you can do in your own way, I think you have to just be aware that there's this sadness in you and that it must find a way. It must find some form of process within your life. I adopted 2 dogs this summer, 2 little whippet pups, me and my girlfriend. We've been talking about getting dogs for a long time, but I'd been reluctant. I'm always reluctant. I'm afraid of commitment, afraid of responsibility. We got a WhatsApp message late at night saying there's these 2 whippets, these 2 little pups. They're only 5 weeks old and they've been abandoned. Would you take them? And I said, look, we're sleeping on it. And we went to see the pups the next day, and sure, they were in my hands all of 5 seconds and I was already in love. So we took the dogs home. And these two whippets are the most beautiful, placid, mellow animals, but they have atomic bombs inside of them. They have this energy that must be expelled every day. And that energy involves them running like bejesus for about 20 minutes. We have to bring them to a park and they just have to go in loops. They create a racetrack themselves and they just go in loops. Voo, voo. They're the fastest thing in the park. All the other dogs just look on dumbfounded, like, what the fuck are these speed demons? And they do this for 20 minutes until they're tired. And then we bring them home and they're placid and they're mellow and they're loving and they sleep and all they want is a pillow. Same thing goes for us. We have these atomic bombs inside of us, and the atomic bombs is our sadness. And we need to find ways to safely release this sadness. I feel that so much of the addiction, so much of the bitterness, so much of the resentment, so much of the unfairness and the cruelty of Irishness in Irish society is because we are like these dogs who don't release their bombs during the day. We have this thing inside of us that never gets out. And our way to become happier as people and then happier as a society is to release it. And the way we work on our sadness is very simple. We're gifted with this. The way you work on your sadness is through creativity. You find ways to be creative. You find ways to enter into that still space where sadness can be the clay that you mold into sculpture. Now, by creative, I just mean something very simple. You go out and you forage. You go out and you become fascinated by leaves. You paint, you draw, you write stories, you create poetry. You just begin to immerse yourself in the romance of life. And in this way, you transform that sadness into something beautiful. Our sadness can feel a lot like a curse, having this inside of us, having this weight inside of us. It can feel like a curse, but it's only a curse when it's not alchemized. It's only a curse when we are not transforming our sadness into something beautiful, when we are not singing, when we're not performing, when we're not dancing, when we're not creating. As children, we turn to creativity so naturally. It's the first thing we do. We love it. Our creativity isn't just a childish thing. It's how we process the weight of existence inside our bodies. The reason we stop doing this as adults, become ashamed. We start to look on creativity as like kids play. But it's not. It's a very important therapeutic process. And especially for Irish people, with the weight of sadness inside of us, the memory, the heaviness of the trauma that we carry in our heart's memory, our muscle memory, the vibrations through our bodies. And we must learn to transform this. My girlfriend is fully aware of when the sadness arrives in me. And she'll notice it. She'll even spot it in the days leading up. I'll become a little bit quiet, maybe a little sullen. It's also a sadness that's sort of mixed to loss, missing Ireland, missing not being there more. I sometimes long for something in Ireland and I can't quite connect to what it is. I don't know if it's Kildare, I don't know if it's the people, I don't know if it's just the smell of the place. Sometimes I feel like what I miss in Ireland I never even actually had. Like I'm nostalgic and homesick for a home that I didn't even know. But regardless, sometimes the sadness, it just creeps up in me and it doesn't always feel like it's rooted in reality. And I think it's not. I think it's rooted in ancient history. I think much in the way that like an old tree You can chart the lines and you can see hundreds and hundreds of years of history inside that tree. I feel the same thing as in my bones. I feel the same thing as in Irish people's bones. And my girlfriend will notice this. She'll see it almost like a glint in my eye and she'll go, oh, I think there's a little bit of sadness coming your way. And I'll take myself home and I'll put myself in a quiet space and I'll just draw and I'll write and I'll scribble little poems and I'll draw little pictures and I'll listen to sad music and I'll listen to Lankum and I'll listen to all the old sad songs and I'll be in that space. And in that way, I won't avoid the sadness. I won't wait till it leaks in a place that I'm not ready for it to leak. I will meet the sadness head on. I'll confront it, not from a place of, oh, I have to rid my body of the sadness, but no, sadness, I have created a space for you. Come in. I can be with you here. Drink tea with me. This sort of idea. The thing I encountered in Ireland all the time was sadness erupting unexpectedly from people who had done their utmost to keep the sadness below the surface, who had tried so hard to keep away from the sadness, and suddenly, without warning, they were overwhelmed by it, and it turned them into just a heap. So when I notice the sadness, and if you notice the sadness, I'd really advise you to just create space for it. Be creative, be quiet, and be gentle with your sadness, and know that as Irish people, we have been gifted this depth of feeling, not to cripple us, but so we can use it as clay and transform it into something creative and into something beautiful. And that, for me, is the opportunity that sadness presents. After my dad died, I went away. I rented a little house in the mountains up in Mallorca. And I just decided I would go live around mountains for a while. And I rented a little room up there. And every day I would just wake up and go hiking with no real idea of where I was going. But on all the walks, my dad would come with me. We would have conversations. He'd appear beside me. And sometimes I'd cry and sometimes I'd laugh. And I go up in these mountains and I take a little notebook and I just write things. None of them will ever be published. None of them will ever see the light of day. I made some drawings. None of them will ever really be shown or anything. It wasn't about an audience. It was just about me trying to process what I couldn't fully explain, what I couldn't think my way through. I just needed to creatively feel this through my body. And in that way, I befriended so much of the sadness and grief in me. And it wasn't only connected to my dad, it was connected to my childhood. It was connected to all my family. It was connected to all of the sadness that's often just in the air in Ireland, that's around us, like a mist, like weeds, like something that grows in the darkness. And in this way, through the sadness, I found a kind of a joy and a peace and a comfort there. And more than that, I found huge inspiration. So, I hope this episode inspires you to not run away from your sadness, to not avoid your inherited melancholy. It's just something you can use. It's a clay, it's a material, it's a muse. And it can be turned into something creative that ultimately is something you've always wanted. I think it's important to remember that, yes, we're born Irish and we're born into Irish families or an Irish history. And yes, we've chosen this. We wanted this. We wanted an education in sadness and we got it. And we wanted that education in sadness not to be miserable, but to transform it into creativity. Thanks for listening. If you like what I talk about, you can come book a session with me. I've got sessions open for this month. I've also got a course called Healing From Irishness, which basically just deals with all of the topics that I talk about here. But you can do it on your own rather than just booking numerous sessions with me. I'm working through all of this. What else? I have a Patreon community. We go deep on spirituality and the quantum and ultimate reality. That's it. Music on this podcast is from Emma Lohman. The design is from Sylvia Sanchez. Thank you for listening. It's been beautiful to do this so far. Beautiful to feel you listening and been a part of it. Love you loads. Slán. Take care.